Hey everyone, ever wondered what the killers actually think of the entity, the ruler of DBD's realm? And the reason all of the characters are here to begin with. Do they like it? Do they hate it? Or do they feel somewhere in between? Are they loyal, or might they fight back? Today we're going to discuss those very questions. To discern each character's opinion, we can look to the lore, the add-ons, the perks, and things like flavor text too. All of these things can help to build a decent picture on what each of them think about the entity. Those who hate the entity is where we'll start out. These are the characters who truly hate the entity for varying reasons, and will likely rebel in some way too. Trapper is a character that is definitely not happy with the entity. He's one of the most renowned for fighting against it, in fact. The visible injuries found across his body quite possibly being from his defiance of the entity, a punishment for fighting back. Evan hates the entity more than likely as it reminds him of his father, an elder presence which brings the worst out in him. I think part of the reason he hates the entity is because he also hates what he's become now in the realm. He's fighting not only against this authority figure, but also to try and reclaim some humanity possibly. Bubba is a character who may initially seem like he would enjoy the realm, and like the entity. However, if we look into it, it's probable he's living in eternal fear basically, with him holding significant fear for the entity, likely more than any other character. What drove him to be what he is in the first place was his family, and how they treated him. He feared them and so fell in line. In the case of the entity, it's a similar deal. He feels scared and so serves it, with it threatening him quite aggressively. It's described in the lore as a terror like no other, but one that equally comforted him. Despite this dark comfort though, I do think he does likely hate the entity and its influence and treatment of him. It's just he knows nothing else, and so believes it to be normal, and further finds it comforting. Oni is quite a debatable one, as his anger could be directed at himself or the entity. I think it's probably both. When entering the realm, Kazan is very angry. He feels like he has failed and his family's legacy is destroyed. To make matters worse, the entity then transforms him into an Oni, a mockery that insults him, and refers back to his days of being called Oni Yamaoka as an insult. Deep down though, Kazan has to know that he is a monster. He did destroy his family. Therefore, I think whilst he would hate the entity, he also hates himself just as much, and that hate builds into anger, which the survivors unfortunately get the brunt of. Artist is a character who must be aware that the entity is somewhat responsible for what happened to her and her friends. Crows were always present when things happened in her life, and now in the realm with her crow appearance and the presence of so many crows, I'm sure she's able to connect the dots. I think she likely hates the entity for how it took advantage of her and manipulated her. Her life and circumstance were almost entirely manipulated by the entity's influence. I think Carmina likely hates it therefore, the creature that destroyed her and left her inhuman in the realm. Whatever humanity lies within, she must hate what made her this way. She's just incapable of stopping it. Unknown is an odd case, but likely does hate the entity too, a creature that was snatched by the entity after it planned to attack Olivia, a woman investigating the Unknown and its killings. Unknown seems unhappy with how the entity did this, and even has some voice lines to suggest it's unhappy or does not want to be restricted to the realm. It's a creature of unknown origin, and so we can't really get an understanding as to why it feels this way, but it likely is just a case of freedom. It freely tormented Greenville before for hundreds of years, only getting taken after all that time. It probably doesn't appreciate the restrictions put on it, and how its ongoing myth is somewhat diminished and defined within the realm. That's a lot of speculation though, as Unknown as always is just a big mystery. Nurse is a character who will more than likely have a dislike for the entity due to what it's made her in the realm. Looking at her tome lore in particular, there are many suggestions that the Crotuspren Asylum where Sally worked was being watched by the entity, with the patient who sways her onto killing possibly even being manipulated by the entity directly. Much like some other characters down here, I'm sure upon reaching the realm, Sally would be able to connect the dots to some extent. Sally clearly does not like her role in the realm entirely, with her showing clear moments of humanity with her Mori, and with her relationship with Philip the Wraith. The constant pain she goes through with every blink surely just isn't a pleasant experience either. Overall, I think she regrets her path and hates both the entity and its realm, but knows she has to serve it. Moving on to those who are discontent with the entity, the characters who have a dislike for the entity but not to the extent of hating it. Freddy likely dislikes the entity, as it has robbed him of many of his freedoms now that he's in the realm. It's even stated that his powers have been directly nerfed. It does say they've also been buffed, but I've personally always struggled to see how. They just seem nerfed overall to me. He went from being almost a godlike being in the dream world to having small abilities like snares and fake pallets and a cool visual filter. Not only this, but he's now trapped in the realm. Sure, Freddy is likely not going to hate the realm all too much, with him still likely gaining enjoyment from the trials and the ability to hunt Quentin in particular, but the realm is still a fraction of the power he had before, which would likely infuriate him and make him feel discontent toward the entity. Wesker will have some split feelings on where he's ended up, but I think he will feel more in the way of discontent with the entity. Wesker was on the brink of executing his plan that had been in the works for years on end. He was robbed of his special moment, which will certainly hurt his ego. The entity does seem to take this into account too by providing him with a perfected serum, but despite this, in other cosmetics we see that he's still experimenting. He's not content with this as a reward. He wants more power for one, but also he wants to do it himself. Despite him likely feeling some enjoyment from hunting down the survivors and feeling superior to them, he is not going to be happy with the entity, however much it may try to supply him with gifts and small ego boosts. Singularity is in a similar boat to Wesker. Hux was on the brink of defeating the Devaka crew and likely planning on wiping out humanity, yet the entity took him before he was able to achieve any of this, and shortly after he'd even gained freedom in his consciousness. Being locked into the realm and forced to repeat the same task over and over has got to be incredibly mind-numbing for a creature that is supposedly more intelligent than any human could be. He can't complete his two goals in the realm of creating the perfect body or destroying humanity, and so I think he would feel discontent for the entity, although not completely, as he would still appreciate it for providing him Gabriel and the ability to hunt down the other survivors. Huntress I'm placing here as I do think while she would enjoy aspects of the realm, such as the hunting and receiving clear enjoyment of the realm itself, I don't think she'd feel loyalty or any positive feeling toward the entity. She doesn't have her freedom anymore, and she doesn't get to fulfill that motherly role, which almost seemed like it was her goal in many ways, was to fulfill that role she felt robbed of. In the realm she doesn't get that opportunity, and only to hunt the survivors. So despite getting enjoyment from this, I think her loyalty would fail with the entity and she would feel discontent with it. The Xenomorphs I think are going to be leaning toward discontent in the realm. Whilst they will follow the entity willingly, they likely don't appreciate the need to follow its rules and trials, which is probably under the threat of their extinction, so no issue with them serving it, but certainly some issues with the entity itself. I'd imagine if they could, or knew how, they would rebel against it, and try to take it down alongside basically any other living thing existing in the realm. Mordeo I think lands in discontent as it's a creature that primarily does what it does to defend its land, removing those deemed unworthy. Mordeo's like of the entity likely hinges on whether it views the realm as its own land to be defended. If not, then the entity has removed it from that and made it unable to properly protect the sacred forest. So I'm saying a discontent here to make it a bit more interesting. Titans are likely going to feel a discontent too. Whilst they did partake in wars and violence, they're still humans within, and likely aren't partaking in the trials willingly. The entity is more than likely influencing them somehow. The armored Titan I think would have a few more hang-ups against the entity, but both I think land here in discontent. The people within, at least, are not going to be okay with what's happening in the realm. Moving on to those who are content with the entity, these are the characters that may have no specific feelings either way, or are alternately very split both ways. Myers is a character where I actually get the vibe he just doesn't really care where he is, he just wants to kill something. In the realm he gets to do exactly that, and he doesn't even have to completely follow the rules that most of the others do. I don't think this necessarily makes Myers like the entity though, as I'm unsure if he's even capable of that, but I do think he would feel content with the entity and its realm. Dredge, similar to Myers, I can see being content with the entity. It gets to basically just do the same thing it was before, just with a few more rules. It's an evil force seemingly, and therefore I doubt has many opinions regarding the entity. It's just existing and doing its thing. The entity probably has more concern for it than it does for the entity, as we have very little idea of what Dredge actually is, and how conscious or caring it is in terms of emotion or opinion. Wraith is a character character who I think has been so broken by the events of his life and the entity's influence that not much of his self remains, leaving just an empty shell. Philip therefore I think is content in the realm. He doesn't like what he's doing or the trials, but he is content with the entity and remains loyal despite all that has happened. I think he's aware of its power and the inescapability of it, after he did try to escape it himself. The darkness always followed. He finds small positives and ways to aid the survivors like the ringing of his bell, and finds humanity in Mercy and his relationship with Nurse. I also think this contentment comes from his feelings of guilt, that he feels like he almost deserves to be here for what he's done. Spirit I think is debatably in the two extremes of this list. She could be placed in hatred or adoration depending on her current mood, which seems to change extremely quickly. She seems to slip between the reality of her situation, which must come with regret but also a hatred toward the entity, the opposite face of anger being one that agrees with what's happening, and one which is definitely loyal to the entity. She seems to flit between these, Rin and her human feelings and the spirit with her raging Yamaoka blood. Therefore as a compromise, I'm placing her here in the middle at contentment, sort of a middle ground, although I would debate she belongs in both the high and low end here. Deathslinger is an interesting case of a character who did seem to want to come to the realm and does like the entity probably for it. However, he probably also has regrets and resentment, but I actually don't think this would be targeted toward the entity. Caleb instead would blame himself, I think. He'd be racked with guilt, yet equally want to take revenge on those who wronged him. He's a complex one, I think. I do think he'd like what the entity has given him, but feel an inner conflict for accepting it. Pyramid Head was a character invited to the realm to serve the entity, and in the realm he does get more freedom than most of the other characters. To me, Pyramid Head is going to be content. He was invited here to do a job, he accepted, and now he's doing the job. I think it's that simple, and he doesn't have any particular favour toward his employer. Luxie has a similar role to Pyramid Head, but just with a bit more visible personality, I would say. Luxie may have more of an opinion on the entity, but I think regardless it's content. It's here to do a job and so fulfills it again. There's maybe a little suggestion the entity did attack it in some way, or forced it into the role of doctor, so debatably that's something, but it's not necessarily clear. I think I'll place it around here. Blight has a bit of a complicated relationship with the entity, after he was thrown to the void upon coming to the realm and summoning his way into the realm to begin with. Talbot further wields the Blight, a substance which seems to infect the realm routinely. With Talbot now in the trials though, the entity seems content with him at least. As for what Blight thinks about the entity, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's hard to tell also because his mind is probably quite warped and a bizarre mosaic of different memories and events that he likely can't order. Blight seems to mainly just want more serum, with his body being entirely destroyed. I think his opinion of the entity therefore is quite non-existent now, and likely just falls into contentment, where once he may have tried to be more defiant and with goals of studying it and researching it, now I think that Talbot is largely gone. Twins are a tricky one. Although it may seem initially like they would like the entity because Charlotte would be grateful for Victor coming back to life, I do think it would be slightly empty. After all, Victor isn't real. He's an entity creation made likely of auric cells from the memories of Charlotte. Not only this, but they aren't even completely safe in the realm. Charlotte has to see Victor being crushed almost every trial, which is likely quite a traumatic experience for her. The realm and the entity therefore are things that I think Charlotte will feel some loyalty for, as it did save her from death. However, not to the extent of actually liking the entity itself. It's going to be a contentment, and okay, this is better than the alternative. Better than being hunted constantly, and better than death for sure. Eddie is sort of a tough one, as he's not really a person, but more an idea almost. Therefore I think as Eddie is sort of just here in the realm fulfilling the killer role in many different forms too, I assume he's content with the entity. Probably happy, probably just getting along with it. William Birkin, I believe, is split between his sides of human and monster, and therefore I think he lands somewhere in the middle. His human side probably has a deep hatred for the entity, a horrible feeling surrounding serving this creature and its trials. The monstrous side of him, or that big eye, likely gets great enjoyment from the trials and appreciates the entity providing the trials and the realm. So I think Birkin is very split, a character that ultimately falls somewhere in between. Birkin is quite literally torn between between these perspectives. Maybe I could separate him and the eye, I don't know. Hag is a character who I think would have dislike or even hatred toward the entity, but it doesn't seem like she's retained much of her humanity in her current state. She seems very much animalistic in the way she acts. Unlike characters like Spirit, there's not even signs necessarily that Lisa remains within. So to me, I think she lands here in contentment, someone who once would have rebelled and disliked the entity, but in her current state is simply going to be surviving and following its orders, loyal and without opinion. Moving on to those who like the entity and would remain loyal to it because of this. Were-Elk is likely just a more monstrous version of Anna, the Huntress, therefore I think it probably likes the entity. It's a creature with a desire to hunt and kill, and so would like the entity in a much simpler sense than Huntress might feel for it. Its needs, as it were, are ultimately met, and so Were-Elk would serve the entity without issue. Demogorgon I think has very little opinion on its situation, and is more concerned with survival and whatnot. It's likely controlled largely by a hive mind back in the real world, and so in the realm it's quite possible it's just getting direct orders from the entity. It likely has a contentment therefore with it. If they are indeed connected by some hive mind type of deal, or even just with Demo viewing the entity as its master, it would be loyal and retain a like for it, I think. Also, Demo just seems pretty happy in the realm, to be honest. Krampus is sort of just an evil creature, and therefore being recruited into the realm, it's probably going to react positively. It maybe isn't going after the same targets as it would be in the real world, and now is being far more violent comparatively. Regardless, I think Krampus and most of these mythological characters would just like the entity and be loyal to its commands. Ferryman is sort of tough to read due to having a lack of lore or flavor text. It seems likely though that after mindlessly sailing people across a river in the underworld, that he's quite grateful to do something different in the realm, so I'll place him here. Minotaur, similar to the Ferryman, would probably like the entity for the sole reason that it saved him from the labyrinth. It's likely going to be loyal and like the entity therefore, with it providing an entirely new place to live and explore in. Sure, it's still sort of trapped, but it has far more freedom than it did before, and at this point has likely grown to enjoy doing what it does. Jabberwock is a creature with the goal of surviving, I would say. Based on the cracked eggshell we can see on it too, we can maybe even assume that it was a creature born in the realm itself. It is a creation of the mad designer after all. I think the Jabberwock therefore would have a definite affinity with the entity, potentially even technically being a literal part of it maybe, so it would probably like the entity. HUNK has forever been a bit of a mystery. I do think he'll like the entity though, probably not to the extent of adoration, but definitely a like. It provides him with a clear goal within a set realm, and he has to execute it. It's the type of murdery task that HUNK probably quite enjoys anyway, and would have carried out before under Umbrella. I think he feels likely positive toward the entity. Vecna is a really interesting case, and despite his seeming goals of trying to take over the entity and its realm, I'm going to place him here as I do think he is a bit more complex. He has a clear like for the entity. He seems to appreciate and almost idolize it in some ways, viewing it as almost something impressive to be studied. But Vecna's also a bit delusional in trying to overthrow it, and believing this is an actual possibility. Vecna, I think, just jumped in without too much thought, assuming he'd be able to overthrow the entity, and tossing out lines about playing his part for now, when really he's probably actually trapped here and is never going to escape. It's fine though, let's let Vecna believe he has a chance. Poor little guy. Vecna will remain loyal whilst trying to study it, but he does seem to covertly plan to overthrow the entity too, so he's really in almost every section of this list depending on how he's feeling. Cenobites, being both Pinhead and Chatterer, are both likely happy with the entity and to serve it. After all, their job is essentially just made easier in the realm. They can routinely catch people opening the box, and even get to teleport some of them out of the realm seemingly and back to the labyrinth. From their perspective, they get a pretty good deal. They'd maybe only not be quite in the adoration tier, as they may be cautious still that the entity as a being is quite powerful. Incredibly powerful. To the extent of even being able to manipulate the lament configuration itself. Nemesis is an interesting case, but ultimately as he enjoys doing what he does, and because he can hunt STARS members eternally, I think he would like the entity and what it's provided him. Nemesis further seems to have different programming in the realm, and with it probably a lot more freedom than he had before. Therefore I think Nemesis would remain loyal and like the entity. He may have to regardless because he's literally programmed to, but who knows. Billy is a character who will likely feel positively toward the entity. Sure, it took him away from Coldwind and did restrict his freedom, but it has overall treated him well it seems, and has provided plenty of freedom in the realm too. He gets to tinker still, kill, and debatably has more freedom with his ability to see other places even beyond Coldwind. I think Billy will feel favourably toward the entity, but not quite to a complete extent. I imagine the guy has trust issues when it comes to relationships and authority figures. He's always going to feel cautious due to his raising. Legion I do typically split up, but I think in this case they are going to share a similar opinion on the entity. I think it's going to be one of like largely, but not completely. They are happy to have the freedom of the realm, and for Frank and Julie in particular to fulfill the role of killers. However, I think they must all, some more than others, to some extent feel scared of the realm and the entity. They are teenagers after all, and they all probably feel like they're in a bit too deep when it comes to the entity. Still, I think they would like it and what it's provided them, although, again, a definite fear. Trickster is a character that I think for the most part would like the entity, as it's provided him a place to easily do what he loves. He no longer has to hide who he really is, or put on a show. I think the main downside of the realm is that he's no longer the main event. He's not beloved by many as he used to be, and I think in general the lack of attention would be a downside for him in the realm. Despite this, I think he would still like the entity for what he's provided, maybe even love it. Skull Merchant I think would like and be loyal to the entity. While she doesn't get to hunt CEOs anymore in the realm, she is given more of a challenge from certain survivors, which is what she wanted, apparently at least. There's Stars members here, God Killers, and the Chosen One. She has plenty to go up against and enjoys doing what she does. She gets to embody the role of Skull Merchant constantly and is greatly feared by those around her. I imagine the part of her routine she liked the most was her embodying Merchant, and now she gets to do that all the time, and so I think she would like the entity and would be loyal to it. Chucky I think would also like the entity, but maybe wouldn't feel quite a sense of loyalty toward it necessarily. He's more concerned with his own enjoyment and doing what he likes. He likely appreciates what the entity has provided him with though, and how he can fulfill his role of the famous murder doll. He's probably also quite happy as he has been physically buffed up in the realm, where he had his strength of a normal human, or maybe even doll before. He now has far more considerable strength and the help of his ghost. Tiffany Valentine is quite similar. I think she'll feel quite similarly to Chucky, with her getting to be devious, and even just from her in-game lines and vibe, she seems very happy within the realm, and would more than likely view the entity quite positively, and would be loyal in the sense of fear perhaps. She gets to feed her twisted desires, and therefore she'd like the entity I think. Bubba Yaga is a mischievous character in folklore who acts both positively and negatively to those it encounters. Therefore in the realm I think it would be content. It can basically do these things still, just on a more restrictive scale. It can still have freedom to rebel a little though, and give mercy if it likes, but equally be brutal and angry. So I think Bubba Yaga would be content with the entity, retaining most of its desires from before, but tempered. Our final category is for those who adore the entity, the characters who love the entity and its realm. Ghostface I think has a love for the entity, and this love is clearly returned by the entity too. I think part of the reason why he loves the entity though is because he's also the favourite. The entity loves him. Ghostface seems happy to be in the realm and remains loyal to the entity and its goals, as many of the goals seem to align with what he wants too. He gets to repeat his stalk routine in the realm as well, just on a slightly smaller scale I suppose. I think ultimately though, Ghostface gets to embody his killer role and is feared in it, likely leaving him loyal and loving toward the entity. Clown I think simply loves the entity as it has provided him a place to easily kill and do as he pleases without the threat of, well, consequences. He even got to keep Maurice, and the entity seems to like Maurice a lot too, which surely helps. Clown gets to freely be a monster in the realm, and therefore I think he's both loyal and has a lot of love for the entity. Sadako will have a like for the entity and remain loyal to it, for the sole reason that it saved her from the well. I think it's really that simple in her case. She was trapped before, and now with the entity she has been freed, or more than likely she has. She may have been deceived and is still in the well, but from her perspective at least, she's been freed after decades of rotting in the well, and so she'll likely remain loyal to the entity, like it, and hate almost everything else. There's a calmness and understanding to their meeting and agreement in the lore. Naughty Bear is a character who I think would love the entity. It has brought him into a new world world, but has made him powerful and invited him to its party, as it were, which is part of what made Naughty so angry to begin with. This is a party he is invited to. Naughty further got to keep his narrator when entering the realm, with it being made manifest. Surely a great gift, and will result in a lot of loyalty and love for the entity. Doctor is a character who likely adores the entity and all that it's given him, with an endless supply of subjects to experiment on. He's always been obsessed with his experiments and tests into electroshock therapy. Now that he has the ability to do this eternally is probably something he loves. The entity further provided him with an inexhaustible spark within his heart, allowing him to eternally summon electricity from his fingertips. Doctor probably isn't overly concerned with freedom like many of the other characters were too, as he worked at just Larry's for over a decade. So long as he has subjects and experiments, he seems content, being the twisted guy he is. Pig is a character who does likely have adoration for the entity, with her believing it to be her new leader after the death of Jigsaw. She sort of convinces herself of this, but it's still a key moment that gives indication of how she might view the entity, in the same way she viewed Jigsaw. She also gets to play more games within the realm, with the trials following a similar pattern. I think therefore she would come away overall with a positive mindset toward them and the entity, her new leader. Knight is a character who likely views the entity quite favourably, with him viewing the realm as a paradise of sorts, the sublime. He's a guy who likes to feel powerful, and so getting to repeatedly exert that power in the trials is probably just a huge positive for him. The entity being his ruler or overseer I don't think is going to be a big deal for him. He likely just adores what is given to him, and by extension the same feelings would apply to the entity. He further got to bring his boys along with him, which surely gave the entity some plus points from Knight's perspective. Plague is a character with a fanatic devotion to the entity, and therefore I find it quite unlikely that she would be anywhere else aside this. Plague surely loves the entity, even if she may feel some resentment toward it over her city falling and her near death. It's from her perspective her own god accepting her into its realm and taking her in to serve it, so Adiris would remain more devoted than ever, I believe, happy to serve her god within its realm. Alright, well that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, thank you so much for watching, and let me know your thoughts as always down below. Thanks, and goodbye.